"I think we should all acknowledge what we're really thinking," my mother-in-law Eleanor said, tapping her diamond-encrusted spoon against her champagne flute. The conversation around the mahogany dining table quieted as everyone turned toward Dee, the woman who had orchestrated this elaborate family discussion about my marriage to her son. I watched her face carefully, noting the smug curl of her painted lips, the way her eyes darted toward her other son, Richard, before settling somewhere above my head with practiced disdain. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." My heart beat steadily, betraying none of the knowledge I'd been safeguarding for nearly 3 years. "Sophia doesn't belong in this family," Eleanor continued, her voice growing sharper with each syllable. "I've consulted with our family attorney, and we believe a quick, quiet annulment is the best option for everyone involved. We're prepared to offer a reasonable settlement." The way she said reasonable made it clear she thought anything would be more than I deserved. Richard nodded emphatically. Aunt Victoria clutched her pearls. My father-in-law William's bushy eyebrows drew together, not in confusion but in measured calculation. "There's more," Eleanor added, reaching across the table to pat her favorite son's hand. "Richard has already drawn up the necessary paperwork. We've known from the beginning what this was about." She gestured vaguely at my simple blue dress, the only non-designer item at this table. The gold digging was transparent from day one. The shocked silence that followed was broken only by my husband James's whispered, "Mother, what are you doing?" All eyes turned to me, awaiting the inevitable breakdown. Tears, pleading, perhaps desperate negotiations for a larger settlement from the family they assumed I had married into for money. Instead, I nodded calmly and said, "Please, everyone, check your phones right now. I'm Sophia Chen, 34 years old, founder and majority shareholder of Horizon Investments, a private equity firm with assets exceeding $4.2 billion. My company, operating through a network of shell corporations and investment trusts, acquired Blackwell Industries, the company that has been in my husband's family for 3 generations, approximately 5 years ago during a period of strategic diversification. What I wanted was simple: a genuine marriage based on love, mutual respect, and honesty. What stood in my way was the crushing weight of generational entitlement, the Blackwell family's assumption that wealth defined worth and their inability to see beyond appearances. The injustice wasn't just their judgment of me as a social climbing gold digger. It was their willful blindness to their own company's changed ownership, their ignorance of who actually signed their substantial paychecks, and their staggering failure to recognize that the very empire they lorded over others now existed at my discretion. "Phones?" Eleanor asked, confusion flickering across her perfectly Botoxed forehead. "What phones?" "I just sent an email," I replied, pulling out my own device. "Everyone should have received it by now." Around the table, family members hesitantly reached for their phones. William was the first to open the email, his eyes widening as he scrolled through the contents. Richard followed, his perpetual smirk vanishing as his face drained of color. "What have you done?" Eleanor hissed, her manicured fingers fumbling with her phone. "It's just documentation," I said evenly. "Something I've always been particularly good at." As more family members opened their emails, the expressions around the table transformed from smug certainty to something entirely different: shock, disbelief, and the dawning horror of recognition. What none of them realized yet was that the emails they were reading contained only a fraction of the information I possessed. The full story of how I came to own their precious family legacy was far more complex than anyone at this table, except perhaps James, could possibly imagine. I grew up in a small apartment above my parents' dry cleaning business in Queens. My father and mother had immigrated from Taiwan with advanced degrees that America didn't recognize, and dreams that wouldn't be deferred. They worked 16-hour days, saved every penny, and poured their hopes into my education. By 14, I was helping with the books. By 16, I'd helped them expand to 3 locations. By 18, I'd earned a full scholarship to Wharton, where I studied finance and strategic management. When my parents' business was threatened by a commercial developer, I learned how investment structures worked, not in classrooms, but in the desperate late nights researching how to save my family's livelihood. I succeeded in protecting their business, but the experience revealed something to me: the enormous power imbalance between those who understood the invisible architecture of money and those who didn't. I decided to dedicate my career to mastering that architecture. After business school came investment banking, brutal years at Goldman Sachs where I worked 100-hour weeks, built a network, and learned how capital really moved in America. I was always the first one in, last one out, the woman who never said no to an assignment, never complained about the casual sexism or not-so-subtle racism. I smiled when they called me Tiger Cub behind my back. I nodded when they expressed surprise at my excellent English. I focused on the numbers, the deals, the structures. And I excelled. When I left to start Horizon Investments at 29, my former colleagues gave me 6 months before failure. Instead, I specialized in turning around undervalued companies with strong fundamentals but poor management. I raised an initial fund of $50 million, delivered exceptional returns, then raised $350 million more. Success bred success. My reputation for data-driven precision and unsentimental decision-making attracted investors who cared more about returns than the gender or race of the person generating them. I first encountered Blackwell Industries during a potential acquisition. Analysis. The company had a storied history in American manufacturing, transitioning from industrial equipment to specialized technology components over 3 generations. Their engineering was exceptional. Their patents were valuable. Their management, however, was abysmal. The financials told the story clearly: declining margins, bloated executive compensation, strategic incoherence, and a dangerous over-reliance on legacy customers. The current CEO, Richard Blackwell, had been appointed not for his competence, but for his last name. The company was burning through its reserves while maintaining a facade of old money and vulnerability. It was a perfect acquisition target, but I hesitated. Hostile takeovers were messy, public, and often destroyed value in the struggle. I preferred a quieter approach. Through a series of carefully structured transactions using different investment vehicles, I began acquiring Blackwell shares whenever they became available. The family owned 51% directly, but the remaining 49% was fragmented among various shareholders. For nearly 2 years, I patiently assembled a position. When a major institutional investor decided to exit their 7% stake, I was ready. That purchase gave my controlled entities effective blocking rights on major decisions. I hadn't planned to acquire the entire company. That changed at a charity gala in Manhattan, where I was representing Horizon as a major donor to educational initiatives for underprivileged youth. I was discussing microfinance structures with another donor when a man approached, tall, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and none of the polished artifice so common in these events. "You're the only person discussing actual strategies instead of showing off their donation," he said, extending his hand. "I'm James Blackwell." My professional instincts should have immediately recognized the connection to Blackwell Industries. Instead, I found myself engaged in the most refreshingly honest conversation I'd had in years. James was thoughtful, funny, and surprisingly knowledgeable about international development models. He worked as an environmental engineer, focusing on water purification systems for developing regions. His passion was genuine, his knowledge deep. Not once did he mention family money or status. When he asked for my number, I hesitated. The potential conflict of interest was obvious, but there was something about his unassuming intelligence that compelled me to say yes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Our first date was at a food truck festival. His suggestion. Our second was at a community garden where he volunteered. By our fifth date, I knew I needed to disclose my position in his family's company, but the right moment never materialized. Each time I considered it, a voice in my head whispered, "Once he knows who you really are, everything will change." The irony wasn't lost on me. I, who prided myself on strategic clarity and unsentimental decision-making, was avoiding a critical disclosure because I was falling in love. 6 months into our relationship, I finally prepared to tell him everything. I invited him to my penthouse apartment, ready for the conversation that might end what had become the most meaningful relationship of my life. But before I could begin, James dropped to one knee, presented a simple but elegant ring, and asked me to marry him. "I know it seems fast," he said, "but when you know, you know. I don't want the big society wedding my family will push for. I want something small, something real, just like what we have." In that moment of genuine vulnerability, I couldn't bring myself to introduce the complication of business ownership. I said yes, rationalizing that I would tell him before the wedding. My stake in Blackwell was still primarily through minority positions and proxies. There was time. What I didn't anticipate was the speed with which James's family would insert themselves into our engagement. Eleanor Blackwell, family matriarch, society fixture, and guardian of the Blackwell legacy, took immediate control of the wedding, planning, steamrolling our preferences for something small. When James pushed back, the emotional manipulation was immediate. Family tradition, his late grandmother's wishes, obligations to their social circle. My first dinner at the Blackwell estate revealed the family dynamic with painful clarity. Richard, the older brother and CEO, spoke about the company with the unearned confidence of someone who has never faced genuine accountability. William, the father, had nominally retired, but still controlled the family's voting shares through a complex trust arrangement. And Eleanor orchestrated everything, maintaining the fiction that Blackwell Industries was still the powerhouse it had once been. None of them asked about my background beyond the most superficial questions. When I mentioned my parents' business, Eleanor quickly changed the subject. When I discussed my finance experience, Richard dismissed it with a condescending smile. The markets are really just gambling dressed up in nice suits, aren't they? Nothing like running a real company that makes real things. I watched James during these interactions. His discomfort, his apologies afterward, his genuine distress at his family's behavior. "They weren't always like this," he confided. "The company's been struggling and they're taking it out on everyone else. Dad and Richard keep making decisions that don't make sense to me. They won't listen to outside advice." 2 weeks before our wedding, I made my decision. I would not disclose my ownership position to James until after we were married, not to trap him, but to protect what we had built together from the inevitable explosion of family dynamics. Our relationship deserved a foundation independent of Blackwell Industries. I implemented strict ethical firewalls within my firm. James would never be involved in any Blackwell-related decisions, and my personal relationship would never influence business judgments regarding the company. We married in the elaborate ceremony Eleanor had orchestrated, but wrote our own vows that spoke to the genuine connection we'd formed. My parents attended, visibly uncomfortable amid the excessive display of wealth, but supportive as always. The Blackwells treated them with the particular politeness reserved for people one believes are inferior, pleasant on the surface, dismissive underneath. After the wedding, I waited for the right moment to have the conversation with James. But Blackwell Industries entered a critical period, major contracts up for renewal, a potential acquisition that would deplete their already strained cash reserves, strategic decisions that could sink the company entirely. Richard's leadership was driving the company toward disaster, with William's tacit approval. Through my various investment vehicles, I now owned or controlled nearly 40% of Blackwell shares. I faced a difficult choice: allow the company to fail through the family's mismanagement, potentially destroying thousands of jobs and my husband's inheritance, or use my position to force changes that would inevitably reveal my role to James. In the worst possible way, I chose a third path. Using intermediaries and proxies, I presented the board with alternative strategies, introduced potential clients that could diversify their revenue streams, and subtly steered governance discussions toward better oversight of management, all while maintaining my anonymity through layers of corporate structures. For nearly 2 years, this delicate balancing act continued. James and I built our life together, renovating a brownstone in Brooklyn, discussing children, planning for a future. He remained involved with the company only peripherally, focusing instead on his environmental engineering work. He noticed the company's improving situation, but attributed it to Richard finally getting his act together. A misconception his brother was happy to encourage. I nearly told James the truth dozens of times. Each time, something stopped me. Another family dinner where the Blackwells treated me with thinly veiled disdain, another dismissive comment about my background, another assumption that I had married James for his family money. The breaking point came 3 months ago. Blackwell Industries faced a make-or-break opportunity, a major government contract that could secure their future for a decade. Richard's approach was fundamentally flawed, emphasizing the family name and legacy connections rather than technological capabilities and cost efficiencies. Through carefully structured guidance via the board, I ensured they pursued a more competitive strategy. When they won the contract, Richard took full credit. At the celebration dinner, to which James and I were belatedly invited, Richard raised a toast to the Blackwell legacy, proving once again that heritage and tradition triumph over these new money tech upstarts. Eleanor followed with her own toast, crystal champagne flute held aloft, to family, real family, and the values that have sustained us for generations. The implied exclusion was unmistakable. James squeezed, my hand under the table, his discomfort evident. Later that night, I overheard Eleanor talking to Victoria in the library. She's clearly after the family money, Eleanor said. James was always the naive one. I've asked Richard to look into her background more thoroughly. I'm convinced there's something she's hiding. No one from that background ends up in our circles without an angle. I'd been called worse things in my career. What broke my heart was William's response. Eleanor's right. We need to protect James from his own poor judgment. I've already spoken with Martin about revising the trust structures. We can't risk family assets falling into her hands. That night, I made my decision. The time for subtle intervention was over. I instructed my team to prepare for the final phase, direct acquisition of Blackwell Industries. Through a series of complex transactions involving convertible notes, proxy agreements, and a timely tender offer to the remaining minority shareholders, Horizon Investments secured effective control of Blackwell Industries. The transaction was completed just 3 days ago. The emails I had just sent to the Blackwell family contained irrefutable documentation, organizational charts, ownership structures, voting rights analyses, and board composition plans. Everything they needed to understand that their family company now answered to me. As they stared at their phones in stunned silence, I turned to James, the only person at the table who mattered to me. I should have told you much sooner, I said quietly. And for that, I'm truly sorry. James looked from his phone to me, his expression unreadable. You own my family's company? Yes, I answered simply. And now we need to talk about what happens next. This is absurd, Richard sputtered, his face turning an alarming shade of crimson as he frantically scrolled through the documentation. These shell companies, these holding structures, this can't be legal. His voice rose with each word, the veneer of sophisticated businessman crumbling into something raw and uncontrolled. I maintained my composure, watching the kaleidoscope of emotions play across the faces around the mahogany table. Eleanor's hands trembled as she set down her phone, her perfectly manicured fingers leaving smudges on the screen. William's expression had hardened into something like grudging respect mixed with simmering fury. Victoria was whispering urgently to her husband, who appeared to be checking their stock portfolio. James stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I need some air," he said, not looking at anyone as he walked out of the dining room. The click of the terrace door echoed in the sudden silence. "You've been planning this from the beginning," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You targeted James. This entire relationship was a corporate takeover strategy." The accusation stung more than I wanted to admit. "No," I replied, firmly. "My relationship with James has nothing to do with Blackwell Industries. In fact, I've maintained strict ethical firewalls between my personal life and business decisions regarding the company." William leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Then explain the timing. You start dating my son, and suddenly mysterious investors begin acquiring our stock." I first identified Blackwell as an acquisition target 14 months before meeting James, I explained, pulling up another document on my phone and sliding it across the table. "Here's the initial analysis, dated and notarized. Meeting your son was coincidence, not strategy." Richard snorted derisively. "There are no coincidences in business. We've had dozens of women try to infiltrate this family for financial gain. You're just more creative than most." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that emotional reactions wouldn't serve me now. "I understand this is shocking, but perhaps we should discuss the actual business implications rather than attacking my character or my relationship with James." William reached for the document, studying it with the intensity that had once made him a formidable CEO. "These performance metrics," he muttered, almost to himself, "they can't be right. We've been exceeding projections for the past 6 quarters. "Those aren't your internal numbers," I clarified. "Those are the actual performance metrics as assessed by independent analysts. The numbers Richard has been presenting to the board have been, shall we say, optimistically massaged." Richard surged to his feet. "That's a damned lie." "Is it?" I pulled out my tablet and opened a secure folder. "Here's a comparison of the quarterly reports you presented to the board versus the actual financial data. The discrepancies are highlighted. I'm particularly interested in explaining the $14.3 million in strategic consulting services paid to Pinnacle Advisors LLC, a company that, coincidentally, lists your vacation home in Aspen as its registered address." The blood drained from Richard's face as William turned to stare at his eldest son. "What is she talking about, Richard?" I continued before Richard could formulate a response. "Or perhaps we should discuss the 3 failed product launches that cost the company $27 million, information that was deliberately withheld from minority shareholders. Or the antique car collection purchased with company funds but registered as prototype transportation research." Eleanor's hand flew to her throat. "Richard wouldn't—" "He did," William interrupted, his voice hollow as he continued scrolling through the documents. "These signatures, these approvals, these are authentic." He looked up, his expression a battlefield of conflicting emotions. "How long have you known about this?" "Since the beginning," I answered honestly. "It was part of my initial due diligence. Blackwell has brilliant engineering, valuable patents, and a respected legacy. What it lacked was ethical leadership." Victoria finally found her voice. "If what you're saying is true, why didn't you expose Richard? Why the elaborate scheme to take over the company secretly?" I met her gaze steadily. "Because a public scandal would have destroyed Blackwell's value and reputation. Thousands of employees would have lost their jobs. The family name, which does, still carry weight with certain government contractors, would have been irreparably damaged. And by the time I met James, I had personal reasons to protect the company's legacy. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the distant sound of James pacing on the terrace. I glanced toward the glass doors, my heart constricting at the rigid line of his shoulders, the tension evident even from a distance. "What happens now?" William finally asked, his voice carrying the weariness of a man forced to confront unpleasant truths about both his company and his son. "That depends on several factors," I replied, shifting into the familiar territory of business negotiation. Horizon Investments now controls 62% of Blackwell Industries. We have the legal right to restructure management, revise strategic priorities, and reallocate resources as we see fit. "You mean fire us all?" Richard interjected bitterly. "Not necessarily," I countered. "Contrary to what you might think, I believe in Blackwell's potential. The company has a proud history and valuable capabilities. What it needs is leadership aligned with market realities and basic ethical standards." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "So, you'll graciously allow us to keep working for you?" "How magnanimous." I ignored the barb. "William has decades of industry experience that shouldn't be discarded. The board would benefit from his institutional knowledge, provided he's willing to acknowledge past governance failures and commit to transparency moving forward." William's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. "You'd keep me on the board?" "In a non-executive capacity, yes," I confirmed. As for Richard, I turned to face him directly. "Your position as CEO is, of course, untenable. The financial irregularities alone would justify immediate termination. However, I'm prepared to offer you a graceful exit. Resignation for personal reasons rather than termination for cause, provided you cooperate fully with the financial investigation and make appropriate restitution." Richard's face contorted, with rage. "You can't just walk in here and—" "I already have," I interrupted calmly. "The paperwork has been filed. The board votes are secured. This isn't a negotiation about whether changes will happen, only about how disruptive they'll be." The terrace door opened, and James walked back in, his face composed but pale. All eyes turned to him as he took his seat beside me, not quite meeting my gaze. "Is all of this true?" he asked quietly. "You've owned the company for— how long?" "I began acquiring shares 5 years ago," I answered, turning to face him fully. "By the time we met, I controlled approximately 18% through various investment vehicles. Currently, Horizon entities control 62%. James nodded slowly, processing. "And you never told me because—" The question hung in the air between us, weighted with all the complexity of our relationship. The business answer was simple. The personal answer was anything but. Initially, it was a conflict of interest I wasn't sure how to navigate, I began, choosing my words carefully. "After we became serious, I planned to tell you before the wedding. But then I saw how your family operated, how they treated you, how they would react to learning your new wife controlled their company." I glanced around the table, where the Blackwells watched our exchange with undisguised interest. "I made a choice to protect our relationship from becoming entangled in corporate politics. I wanted us to build something real, something separate from Blackwell Industries. And then it became harder to tell me the longer you waited," James finished, a hint of understanding softening his features. "Yes," I admitted. "The longer I waited, the more it would seem like a deliberate deception rather than a complex ethical situation I was trying to navigate." Eleanor scoffed. "How convenient." James turned to his mother, something hardening in his expression. "Not now, Mom." The sharpness in his tone silenced her immediately. He turned back to me. "I need to understand something. These last 3 years, was any of it about gaining control of the company?" "No," I answered without hesitation. By the Time we met, I already had the investment strategy in motion. Meeting you complicated things enormously from a business perspective. If anything, our relationship delayed the acquisition because I was trying to find solutions that wouldn't put you in an impossible position. Richard laughed harshly. And we're supposed to believe that? The timing is too perfect. James surprised me by responding before I could. Actually, Richard, I believe her. He turned to face his brother. Because unlike you, Sophia has never lied to me about who she is fundamentally. She omitted information about her business interests, yes, but she never pretended to be someone she's not. He glanced at the documents still displayed on William's tablet. Unlike some people at this table. William cleared his throat. James, son, you need to think carefully about where your loyalties lie. This woman has engineered a hostile takeover of your family's legacy. Has she? James countered, his voice gaining strength. Because from what I'm seeing, the legacy was already being destroyed from within. Those financial discrepancies, he gestured toward the tablet. That's not Sophia's doing. That's on us, on our family. A weighted silence fell over the table. Eleanor looked stricken. Victoria studied her manicure intently. Richard's jaw worked silently, as if chewing on words. He couldn't quite swallow. William finally broke the silence. What are your intentions for the company? He asked me directly, his tone shifting from antagonistic to cautiously professional. Stabilization, modernization, and ethical governance, I replied. Blackwell has world-class engineering capabilities being squandered by outdated management practices and... I paused, glancing at Richard. Financial inefficiencies. With proper leadership and strategic focus, the company could double its market value within 3 years. And the family's role in this new vision? William pressed. That depends entirely on individual qualifications and commitment to the company's success, I said. Blackwell isn't a hobby or a trust fund. It's a business with thousands of employees, whose livelihoods depend on competent leadership. William nodded slowly, something like reluctant respect flickering across his face. And if we refuse to cooperate with this transition? I met his gaze directly. Then the transition becomes more abrupt and public. I'd prefer to avoid that outcome, but I'm prepared for it if necessary. Eleanor's teacup clattered against its saucer. This is nothing short of extortion. It's business, I corrected gently. And unfortunately, business decisions have been conflated with family dynamics for far too long at Blackwell. That ends today. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. I glanced down to see my CFO's name on the screen. Excuse me, I need to take this. I stood and stepped into the hallway, aware of the tension-filled silence I left behind. When I returned a few minutes later, I found James and his father in intense conversation, their voices low but urgent. Richard stood by the window, staring out with rigid posture. Eleanor appeared to be texting frantically. That was my chief financial officer, I announced. The transition team is ready to begin the audit process tomorrow morning. I've instructed them to be discreet and professional. William looked up, his expression unreadable. I've been discussing options with James. If, and it's a significant if, what you've presented about Richard's actions is accurate, then perhaps a controlled transition is in everyone's best interest. Richard spun around. Dad, you can't be serious. She's manipulated this entire situation. The numbers don't lie, Richard, William replied wearily, and they tell a story I can no longer ignore, no matter how painful. James rose from his chair and came to stand beside me, not quite touching but close enough to signal his position. I've told Dad that I trust your business judgment, Sophia. I'm angry about being kept in the dark, but I understand the impossible situation you were navigating. He paused, meeting my eyes. We'll have more to discuss privately, but right now I think we need to focus on saving the company rather than assigning blame. Relief washed through me, tempered by the knowledge that this was just the beginning of a difficult journey. The professional challenge of restructuring Blackwell paled in comparison to the personal work needed to rebuild trust with James. "I think that's wise," I agreed softly. "Shall we continue this discussion in a more structured format tomorrow?" My team has prepared transition options that respect the company's legacy while addressing its challenges. William nodded slowly. 9 o'clock. My office, or I suppose it's your office now. It's still your office, I assured him. This isn't about erasing the Blackwell legacy, but about preserving its best aspects while correcting its course. As we prepared to leave, Eleanor stepped directly into my path, her eyes cold. "You may have won this round, Sophia, but don't think for a moment that this family will simply roll over and accept your authority." I met her gaze calmly. "I never expected it to be easy, Eleanor. But unlike you, I'm not fighting for pride or position. I'm fighting for the company's future, and incidentally for your family's legacy. Someday, you might even thank me for it." Her incredulous laugh followed us out the door as James and I stepped into the cool evening air, the weight of unspoken words heavy between us. The real conversation, the one that would determine our future together, was just beginning. Our drive home unfolded in weighted silence. James kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The distance between us in the confined space of the car felt immeasurable, a chasm filled with unspoken questions and shattered assumptions. When we finally reached our brownstone, James headed straight for the living room. I followed, shrugging, off my jacket and kicking off my heels, a small act of vulnerability that felt necessary for the conversation ahead. "I should have brought scotch," James said, breaking the silence as he dropped onto the sofa. "This feels like a scotch conversation." A fragile laugh escaped me. "I have that Japanese whiskey your colleague brought back from Tokyo, top shelf of the bar cabinet." James nodded and retrieved the bottle and 2 glasses, pouring generous measures for us both. He handed me one, our fingers brushing in the exchange. "To revelations," he said, raising his glass in a sardonic toast. I clinked my glass against his. "To truth, however belated." We both drank, the silence between us shifting from hostile to something more contemplative. "When did you first realize my brother was embezzling?" James finally asked, surprising me with his opening question. "About 4 years ago," I replied honestly. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable if you knew what to look for. Money moving through shell companies, strategic consulting fees to non-existent entities, inflated invoices from vendors who kicked back percentages. James shook his head, a bitter smile playing at his lips. "And here I thought he was just an entitled, mediocre CEO. Turns out he's a criminal." The line between poor management and criminal behavior is often thin in family businesses, I offered. Entitlement breeds justification. Richard probably started small. Company card for personal expenses. A luxury trip disguised as business. Development. By the time I identified the pattern, it had escalated to systematic looting. And my father? I chose my words carefully. William was willfully blind. The documentation suggests he ignored red flags, approved suspicious transactions without due diligence, and rationalized declining performance metrics. Not criminal, but certainly negligent. James nodded slowly, processing. "And you never considered just telling me? Before today?" The question I'd been dreading hung between us, demanding absolute honesty. "I considered it countless times," I admitted. I drafted speeches, rehearsed explanations. There were moments when the words were literally on the tip of my tongue. I took another sip of whiskey, welcoming its warmth. But then there would be another family dinner where your mother would make some cutting remark about my background, or Richard would condescend about real business, and I'd think, what would happen if I told you? James waited, his expression open but guarded. Best case scenario, you'd believe me but be forced into an impossible position between your wife and your family. Worst case, you'd think I was manipulating the situation, trying to drive a wedge between you and them. Either way, I couldn't see a path where the truth didn't damage us. So you made that decision for me, James said, not accusingly, but with a weight that carried its own reproach. I did, I acknowledged, and that was wrong. I justified it as protection of you, of us, of the company. But it was also fear, James. Fear that you might see our entire relationship differently if you knew who I really was professionally. James set his glass down, leaning forward. That's what I'm struggling with, Sophia. Not the business aspect. I couldn't care less who owns. What percentage of Blackwell? What hurts is that you didn't trust me enough to know all of you. It wasn't about trust, I said quickly, then paused, reconsidering. Or maybe it was, but not in the way you think. I've spent my entire career being underestimated, dismissed, or treated as an outsider. When we met, you saw me. Just me. Not my achievements, not my bank account, not my professional reputation. You saw Sophia, not the CEO of Horizon Investments. James's expression softened slightly. I fell in love with you, not your resume. Exactly. And I was terrified of losing that. Of watching your perception of me transform once you knew the full picture. I set my glass down, forcing myself to maintain eye contact. It was selfish and short-sighted. I see that now. James was quiet for a long moment, contemplating the amber liquid in his glass. I keep thinking about all those family dinners, he finally said. You sitting there, listening to Richard boast about deals you probably financed, hearing my mother make those condescending comments about your background, watching my father lecture you about how real business works. A rueful smile touched his lips. How did you not laugh in their faces? The unexpected question startled a genuine laugh from me. Sometimes I nearly did, especially when Richard explained the complex world of high finance to me last Christmas. James groaned, covering his face with his hand. God, I remember that. He spent 20 minutes mansplaining leveraged buyouts to someone who's executed. More of them than he's had haircuts. To be fair, Richard gets a lot of haircuts. Our shared laughter broke the tension, creating a small bridge across the chasm between us. When it subsided, James's expression had turned thoughtful. You know, what I keep coming back to, he said. Through all of this, the acquisition, managing the company from the shadows, enduring my family's condescension, you never used me for information. Not once did you pump me for insights about Blackwell's operations or my family's plans. Nodded. That was a line I refused to cross. I maintained rigid separation between our relationship and my business interests. Anything I learned about Blackwell came through proper channels, financial disclosures, industry analysis, board materials available to shareholders. Which is why the company improved under your influence, James mused. You were making decisions based on actual data, not family politics or ego. The irony is that I initially planned to be a passive investor, I admitted. But watching the company flounder under Richard's leadership, seeing the potential being wasted, I couldn't stand by and do nothing. James looked at me with new understanding. You actually care about Blackwell, not just as an investment, but as a company. I do, I confirmed softly. It has extraordinary potential, pioneering technology, dedicated employees, meaningful history. All it needs is leadership that prioritizes innovation over tradition, merit over bloodline. And that's where my family failed, James said, the realization settling heavily. They've been living in a fantasy where the Blackwell name alone ensures success. Many legacy companies struggle with that transition, I offered. The skills that build a company aren't always the same ones that sustain it through changing markets. James studied me for a long moment. You know, in all the scenarios I imagined for tonight's dinner, my wife revealing she secretly owns my family's company wasn't even on the list. A smile tugged at my lips despite the gravity of our conversation. What did you expect? Oh, the usual. Mom insulting you. Richard bragging about himself. Dad making vague, disapproving noises while drinking. Too much brandy. He shook his head. I was prepared to defend you. Again. I even rehearsed this whole speech about how they needed to accept you as part of the family. A short laugh escaped him. Little did I know you technically own the family. Just the company, I corrected, then hesitated before asking the question that had been haunting me since the revelation. James, where does this leave us? His expression turned serious again. Honestly, I don't know. I need time to process all of this. I'm hurt that you kept something so significant from me for years. I understand your reasons, even respect the impossible ethical position you were navigating, but it still feels like a fundamental breach of trust. The words stung, but I nodded, accepting them as fair. I understand. That said, he continued, surprising me, watching you handle my family tonight was illuminating. You were strategic but fair. You could have destroyed Richard publicly, humiliated my father, leveraged your power for revenge after how they've treated you. But you didn't. That wouldn't serve any productive purpose, I said simply. Exactly. James leaned forward, his eyes intent on mine. And that's why, despite everything, I still believe in us. You made a significant error in judgment by not telling me sooner, but your heart was in the right place. You were protecting both me and the company, even at personal cost. Relief coursed through me, though I tried not to show it too plainly. Where do we go from here? James sighed, running a hand through his hair. First, we need absolute honesty moving forward. No more compartmentalized lives, no more strategic omissions. I need to know that the woman I'm married to is the same person in every context. Home, family, business. Agreed, I said immediately. Complete transparency. Second, he continued, I think I need to take a more active role in Blackwell's transition. Not because I don't trust you to handle it. Clearly you're more qualified than anyone in my family. But because I need to reconcile these two worlds that have suddenly collided. I nodded. What are you thinking? I'm an environmental engineer, with a focus on sustainable manufacturing, he said, a new energy entering his voice. Blackwell's Industrial Components division has been ignoring the market shift toward green technology for years. I could lead a sustainability initiative, repositioning that division to meet emerging regulatory standards and consumer demands. The idea made perfect business sense, but more importantly, it would give James agency in the company's future without tokenizing him. That's actually brilliant, I said. The market analysis supports it, and your expertise is exactly what's needed. And it would give me a professional identity within Blackwell that's completely separate from either being William's son or Sophia's husband, he added. I'd be there on merit. Just like I've always seen you, I reminded him gently. A smile, genuine though still tinged with complexity, crossed his face. There's one more thing we need to discuss. What's that? My mother, he said, his expression turning wry. She's going to be a problem. I couldn't help but laugh. That might be the understatement of the year. You don't know the half of it, James warned. Eleanor Blackwell doesn't lose gracefully. The gold digger narrative was just her opening salvo. Once she regroups, she'll come at you, at us, with everything she has. I've dealt with hostile parties in business before, I reassured him. Not like my mother, James countered. This isn't business for her, it's personal. She built her entire identity around being the matriarch of the Blackwell Empire. You've effectively dethroned her. The warning sent a chill through me. Not for my own sake, but for what it might mean for James. What do you think she'll do? Best case? Try to turn the extended family and social circle against you. Spread rumors. Make your leadership transition as difficult as possible through informal channels. James swirled the remaining whiskey in his glass. Worst case? Look for legal vulnerabilities. Attempt to contest the acquisition. potentially even try to drive a wedge between us. I considered this soberly. And your father? Richard? Dad's a businessman at heart. Once he accepts the situation, he'll adapt, especially if you keep him involved in some capacity. Richard? James frowned. Richard is the wild card. His ego is massive, but so is his sense of self-preservation. If the financial improprieties are as significant as you suggest, he might take a generous exit package and disappear to avoid potential legal consequences. I nodded, mentally cataloging these assessments against my own. Thank you for the insights. They'll help me prepare. James set his empty glass down and turned fully toward me, taking my hands in his. Sophia, I need you to understand something. I'm angry and hurt about the deception, and it will take time to rebuild what was damaged tonight. But I'm not walking away. We'll figure this out. The company, my family, our marriage, together. The tightness that had been constricting my chest since the revelation at dinner finally eased. Together, I agreed, squeezing his hands. That's all I want. His phone buzzed, interrupting the moment. James glanced at it and grimaced. It's starting. 12 missed calls from my mother, 8 from Richard, and a surprisingly civil text from Dad asking to meet for breakfast tomorrow. What? Will you tell them? James tucked the phone away without responding to any of the messages. The truth. That I'm processing everything, that I need space to think, and that regardless of what happens with Blackwell Industries, they need to respect my relationship with you. They won't make that easy, I warned. A determined expression settled over his features, one I hadn't seen before, a glimpse perhaps of the leader he could become when freed from his family's shadow. They don't have to make it easy. They just have to accept it as reality. As we sat together in our living room, the future uncertain but facing it united, I realized that tomorrow would bring the next phase of this complicated journey. The business challenges of restructuring Blackwell paled in comparison to navigating the personal dynamics of a family in crisis. Yet for the first time since this began, I felt genuinely hopeful. The gold digger narrative had been shattered, but something far more valuable was emerging from its ruins, a partnership of equals, built on hard truths rather than comfortable fictions. The Blackwell Industries headquarters occupied an imposing Art Deco building in downtown Boston, its limestone facade and brass fixtures a testament to the company's century-old legacy. As my car pulled up to the executive entrance at precisely 8:30 a.m., I spotted 3 news vans parked across the street. That was fast, my chief of staff, May, remarked beside me. Eleanor works quickly. Predictably quickly, I corrected, checking my reflection in my compact mirror. The 4 hours of sleep I'd managed were concealed beneath strategic makeup application. Have Jackson prepare a statement emphasizing business continuity and commitment to Blackwell's heritage. No specifics on leadership changes yet, May nodded, already typing on her tablet. The transition team is in place. Legal has the paperwork ready for the board members who've agreed to resign. HR has prepared separation packages for Richard's executive team. I closed my compact with a decisive snap. And security? New access protocols implemented at midnight. Richard's credentials have been downgraded. The digital forensics team started copying his hard drives at 4 a.m. A small smile touched my lips. Eleanor might have called the press, but I had spent the night executing a meticulously planned corporate transition. Let's go. As we entered the marble lobby, employees stopped to stare. Word had clearly spread overnight. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, punctuated only by the soft chime of May's incoming messages. William's executive assistant looked up as we approached, her expression a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Ms. Chen, Mr. Blackwell is expecting you. Thank you, Margaret, I replied, noting her surprise at being addressed by name. I look forward to continuing to work with you during this transition. Relief flashed across her features as she buzzed us into the chairman's office. William stood at the window, looking out at the Boston skyline, his posture suggesting he'd aged a decade overnight. "The board members are gathering in the main conference room," he said without turning. "Several have questions about the legitimacy of your acquisition." "I anticipated that," I replied calmly. "The SEC filings are impeccable, but I've prepared a detailed presentation on the acquisition structure to address any concerns." William finally turned, studying me with tired eyes. "What are your plans for Richard?" "That depends on him," I answered honestly. "If he cooperates with the financial investigation and transitions his responsibilities professionally, he can resign with dignity and a reasonable separation package. If he fights, I let the alternative hang unspoken." William nodded, his expression grim. "He emptied his office at 3 a.m. Security footage shows him removing files." "Digital copies of everything were already secured," I assured him. "And the files he took were tracked. Nothing leaves this building without our knowledge." A ghost of a smile touched the older man's lips. "You're thorough." "It's why Horizon succeeds where others fail," I replied simply. "Shall we join the board?" The main conference room fell silent as we entered. 12 men and 1 woman seated around a gleaming mahogany table. I recognized them all from my due diligence. Most were old family friends or business associates of William's, selected for loyalty rather than expertise. "Good morning," I began, taking my position at the head of the table despite not being formally introduced. "I understand you have questions about the change in ownership at Blackwell Industries. I'm here to address them directly and transparently." Vernon Caldwell, the longest-serving board member, spoke first. "With all due respect, Ms. Chen, this seems like a hostile takeover executed through deception." "I understand why it might appear that way," I acknowledged. "However, every share acquisition was conducted through proper channels, in compliance with all SEC regulations. The board was informed of each significant position change, as legally required. Informed through obscure filings about shell companies," another board member countered. "The Blackwell family had no idea who was behind these acquisitions." "That's a failure of due diligence, not disclosure," I replied evenly. "The information was available to anyone who looked carefully. The fact that no one bothered to investigate these investors speaks to a concerning lack of oversight by this board." William cleared his throat. "Sophia is correct. We became complacent, assuming the family's controlling interest made us invulnerable. That was a costly mistake." Before anyone could respond, the conference room door burst open. Eleanor Blackwell strode in, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that radiated authority, her expression thunderous. "This meeting is inappropriate without all family stakeholders present," she announced, taking an empty seat without being invited. "I've spoken with our attorneys. There are serious questions about the legitimacy of these share transfers. I had expected this move." "Mrs. Blackwell, while you're welcome to observe as William's wife, you have no official role at Blackwell Industries and no standing to challenge legitimate stock transactions." Eleanor's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I've been the backbone of this company for 40 years. Every major client relationship has been cultivated through my social connections. If you think you can simply—" "Mother." James's voice cut through, the tension as he entered the room. This isn't helping. All eyes turned to my husband, clearly surprised by his presence. He had dressed for the occasion in a tailored suit I'd never seen before, projecting a quiet authority that commanded attention. "James," Eleanor said, momentarily flustered. "I didn't realize you would be here." "Clearly," he replied, taking the seat beside me. "I'm here both as Sophia's husband and as a stakeholder in Blackwell's future." William looked at his son with newfound respect. "James has suggested some promising directions for our industrial components division, focusing on sustainable manufacturing technologies." Murmurs of surprise circulated around the table. James had always been the other Blackwell son in the company narrative, The environmentalist, the idealist, the one who chose a career of purpose over profit. I seized the opportunity to redirect the conversation. Let's address the immediate concerns. First, Blackwell Industries remains Blackwell Industries. There are no plans to rebrand or erase the company's heritage. Second, William has agreed to remain as chairman emeritus, ensuring continuity in key relationships. And Richard? Vernon asked. Richard has chosen to pursue other opportunities. William answered diplomatically. His departure is effective immediately. The carefully worded statement hung in the air, its implications clear to everyone present. No mention of financial irregularities, no hint of the ongoing forensic audit, just a clean break that preserved the family's public dignity. Eleanor's hands clenched around her designer handbag. This is absurd. Richard built the modern Blackwell. Without him, the company might actually turn a profit this quarter, James interrupted, sliding a folder into the center of the table. These are the preliminary findings from the financial review. I suggest everyone take a moment to review them before making further statements about Richard's contributions. I watched with carefully concealed admiration as my husband took control of the narrative. This was a side of James I'd glimpsed only occasionally. Decisive, strategically minded, unwilling to perpetuate comfortable fictions. As the board members reviewed the documents, expressions of shock and dismay spread around the table. Vernon was the first to look up, his face ashen. These discrepancies, they can't be accurate. They're preliminary figures, I clarified. The full audit will likely uncover additional issues. But yes, the pattern of financial mismanagement is unfortunately very real. Eleanor snatched the folder, scanning its contents with growing horror. These are fabrications. Richard would never. He did, Mother, James said quietly. The evidence is irrefutable. The question now isn't whether it happened, but how we move forward with minimal damage to the company and our family's reputation. Sao. Room fell silent as the reality sank in. The Blackwell legacy wasn't being destroyed by an outside force. It had been deteriorating from within for years, propped up by family pride and willful blindness. Vernon cleared his throat. What are you proposing, Ms. Chen? A strategic restructuring, I replied, activating the presentation screen. Phase 1 involves stabilizing the financial situation and implementing proper governance. Phase 2 focuses on technological innovation and market expansion. Phase 3 reimagines Blackwell for the next century. For the next hour, I outlined the comprehensive plan my team had developed, addressing questions with data-driven precision. Throughout the presentation, I was careful to emphasize continuity over disruption, evolution over revolution. The board's resistance gradually transformed into cautious engagement. The Sustainable Manufacturing Initiative would be led by James, I concluded, turning to my husband. His expertise in environmental engineering positions Blackwell to capitalize on the growing demand for green industrial components. James took over seamlessly, presenting his vision with passion and technical depth. The board members who had always dismissed him as the family idealist now listened with new respect as he outlined market projections and competitive advantages. When the presentation concluded, William was the first to speak. I believe this plan offers Blackwell its best path forward. I motion to approve the restructuring as presented, with appropriate oversight mechanisms in place. Vernon seconded the motion, and one by one, the board members voted their approval, all except Eleanor, who had no actual vote but made her opposition abundantly clear through her glacial silence. As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out, many stopping to shake James's hand or exchange words with William. Eleanor remained seated, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. When the room had emptied except for the four of us, she finally spoke. This isn't over. The Blackwell name still means something in this city. You may control the company, but you'll never be accepted in our circles. I met her gaze steadily. With respect, Eleanor, I'm not interested in being accepted in your circles. I'm interested in building a company that honors its legacy while embracing its future. Whether you choose to be part of that future is entirely up to you. And you. She turned to James, her voice breaking slightly. How could you side with her against your own family? James sighed heavily. I'm not taking sides, Mother. I'm trying to save the company our grandfather built, the company Richard was systematically looting while you and Dad looked the other way. We didn't know, William began. You chose not to know, James corrected gently. There's a difference. Eleanor gathered her belongings with trembling hands. I've already spoken with the Cabot Winslows and the Harringtons. They're appalled by this coup. The Summer Benefit Committee will certainly be reconsidering Blackwell's traditional sponsorship. I suppressed a smile at the emptiness of the threat. That's certainly their prerogative. However, James and I have already reached out to the Massachusetts General Hospital Foundation about redirecting our philanthropic focus toward their new research center. They seemed quite enthusiastic. Eleanor's face paled. The Hospital Foundation. Chairmanship was her most prized social position. You wouldn't dare. It's not about daring, Mother, James intervened. It's about aligning our corporate giving with actual impact rather than social prestige. The research center will save lives. She looked between us, finally recognizing the united front we presented. Without another word, she turned and left, the clip of her heels echoing down the corridor. William exhaled slowly. She'll make this difficult. Eleanor has spent decades building her identity around being Mrs. William Blackwell III. I know, I acknowledged. But the company needs to move forward regardless. Are you still committed to the transition plan we discussed? He nodded, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. I am. Richard's actions have left me no choice. But I'd like to speak with him before the audit findings become public. He's still my son. Of course, I agreed. The forensic accountants will need another week to complete their work. That gives you time for a private conversation. After William departed, James and I found ourselves alone in the boardroom, where generations of Blackwells had steered the company's course. That went better than expected, James observed, loosening his tie slightly. The board was surprisingly receptive once they understood the financial realities, I agreed. Your mother, however, James grimaced. She's just getting started. You should expect social warfare on a scale you've never imagined. Eleanor doesn't fight fair. Neither do I when necessary, I reminded him with a small smile. But I'd prefer not to fight at all. There's room for her in Blackwell's future if she's willing to adapt. That's what makes you different from her, James said, his voice softening. You're not interested in winning for the sake of winning. You actually care about building something worthwhile. Before I could respond, May appeared at the doorway. I hate to interrupt, but there's a situation developing. Richard is giving an impromptu press conference on the front steps. James and I exchanged alarmed glances before moving quickly to William's office, which offered a view of the building's entrance. Below, Richard stood surrounded by reporters, gesticulating dramatically as cameras flashed. What's he saying? I asked May. She checked her tablet. He's claiming he was forced out in a hostile takeover engineered by, and I quote, a manipulative outsider who seduced my brother as part of her scheme to steal our family legacy. James cursed under his breath. He's going with character assassination, predictable but effective with the old Boston crowd. I watched the scene below with analytical detachment. He's making a critical error. By going public with unsubstantiated accusations, he's opened the door for us to respond with facts. You're going to release the audit findings? James asked. Not yet, I replied, already formulating our countermove. First, we issue a statement expressing disappointment that Richard has chosen to make a private family and business matter public. We wish him well in his future endeavors and remain focused on Blackwell's continued success. Kill him with civility. James nodded appreciatively. Then what? A slow smile spread across my face. Then we announced the new Blackwell Institute for Sustainable Technology, with you as its founding director. We emphasize the company's commitment to its hometown of Boston, including a major expansion that will create 300 new jobs. James caught on immediately, shifting the narrative from family drama to economic impact and innovation. The local business community will care more about job creation than Richard's wounded pride. Exactly, I confirmed. And before Richard can regroup, we announced the Environmental Certification Initiative for the Industrial Division, positioning Blackwell as an industry leader in sustainable manufacturing. As we watched Richard below, his audience of reporters already beginning to disperse as the novelty of his accusations waned, I felt a surge of quiet confidence. The gold digger narrative was crumbling in real time, replaced by something far more powerful. The story of a company being reborn through vision and competence rather than birthright. You know, James said thoughtfully, for someone who supposedly married me for money, you're working awfully hard to make my family's company more valuable. I leaned against him slightly, allowing myself a moment of connection amid the corporate battlefield. The irony isn't lost on me. He wrapped an arm around my waist, our reflections visible in the window glass as we watched Richard's failed media offensive wind down. We make a good team, Sophia Chen Blackwell. Yes, I agreed, already planning our next moves in this high-stakes game of corporate chess. I believe we do. Mrs. Blackwell, over here. The photographer's call pulled my attention from my conversation with the hospital's chief of cardiology. Camera flashes erupted as I turned, momentarily blinding me at the entrance to the Massachusetts General Hospital Spring Gala. It's Ms. Chen professionally, I corrected with a practiced smile, though I answer to Mrs. Chen Blackwell socially. James appeared at my side, handsome in his tuxedo. And I answer to Mr. Chen Blackwell when the situation warrants? He added with a wink that made the society photographers click their shutters frantically. Our hyphenated compromise had become something of a public fascination since we'd announced it last month. 6 weeks had passed since the boardroom confrontation at Blackwell Industries. 6 weeks of calculated moves and counter-moves in a social chess match that had consumed Boston's elite circles. Tonight marked my first major public appearance at an event where Eleanor had traditionally reigned supreme as the Hospital Foundation's longtime chairwoman. Shall we? James offered his arm, and we ascended the grand staircase into the ballroom. The space fell into a hush as we entered, 300 of Boston's wealthiest and most influential citizens turning to observe our arrival. I wore a sleek gown in Blackwell blue, a subtle corporate branding choice that hadn't escaped the notice of the business press. James had initially raised an eyebrow at the suggestion but conceded when I explained the psychological impact. People are visual creatures, I'd told him. We're redefining the public image of Blackwell. Every detail matters. Now, as conversations resumed with heightened energy, I scanned the room strategically. Eleanor stood with her usual coterie near the chamber orchestra, her smile tight as she deliberately avoided looking our way. William was engaged in conversation with the mayor, appearing more relaxed than I'd seen him since the transition began. Richard was notably absent, reportedly in Aspen at a wellness retreat that everyone understood was corporate rehab. Dr. Abernathy is by the ice sculpture, James murmured, guiding me toward the hospital's renowned neurosurgeon. He's been wanting to discuss the Medical Technology Division's new surgical imaging system. As we made our way across the room, I cataloged the subtle social dynamics at play. Some guests deliberately stepped back, unwilling to be seen engaging with us while Eleanor was watching. Others moved forward eagerly, sensing the shift in power. The calculations were nakedly transactional, exactly as I'd expected. Ms. Chen, the Innovation Fund announcement was inspired. Dr. Abernathy greeted me, referring to Blackwell's newly established $50 million endowment for medical technology development. particularly the emphasis on accessibility for smaller hospitals. James deserves the credit for that provision, I replied, genuinely proud of my husband's contribution to the initiative. He insisted that breakthrough medical technology is meaningless if only elite institutions can afford it. As the conversation turned technical, I felt a presence at my elbow. Victoria Cabot Harrison, Eleanor's closest ally and Boston's most notorious gossip, had materialized beside me. "Sophia, darling," she purred, air-kissing both my cheeks. "What a statement you're making tonight. That shade of blue is so corporate." Her smile remained fixed as her eyes conveyed the intended insult. "Thank you, Victoria," I replied warmly. "I believe in aligning personal and professional values. Speaking of which, how is your husband's hedge fund performing since the SEC inquiry? I understand the withdrawal of institutional investors has been challenging." Her smile faltered. "The SEC investigation into Harrison Capital was supposed to be confidential, but financial intelligence was my business." Victoria regrouped quickly. "Charles is exploring exciting new opportunities. In fact, Eleanor has introduced him to several promising international investors." I nodded sympathetically. "International private capital can be quite complex. If he'd like some guidance navigating compliance requirements, Horizon's regulatory team would be happy to assist." The veiled reminder that I understood exactly what international investors often meant in desperate situations and had the resources to either help or hinder landed precisely as intended. Victoria's expression shifted from condescension to calculation. "How thoughtful," she managed, already recalibrating her position in our dynamic. "I must say, the hospital board was pleasantly surprised by your donation. Eleanor had suggested you might redirect the traditional Blackwell support." "Family disagreements shouldn't affect philanthropic commitments," I replied. "In fact, we've increased the annual contribution by 40%. Victoria's eyebrows rose. 40%? That's substantial. Healthcare innovation aligns perfectly with Blackwell's new strategic direction, I explained. Which reminds me, I believe the nominating committee for next year's gala leadership is meeting next week. James and I were hoping you might consider a position. Your event planning expertise is unmatched." The offer was perfectly calibrated, a prestigious role that would subtly separate Victoria from Eleanor's influence while bringing her into our orbit. I watched the mental calculations play across her face. "I'd be delighted to discuss it," she finally replied, victory achieved. "Shall we have lunch at the Bristol next week?" As Victoria departed to spread news of her ascension, James squeezed my hand. "That was masterful," he murmured. "Victoria will have switched allegiances completely by dessert. She's pragmatic," I observed. "Unlike your mother, who operates on principle, however misguided." Speaking of whom, James nodded discreetly toward the opposite side of the room, where Eleanor was now in animated conversation with the hospital's board chairman. "I believe that's our cue." We made our way through the crowd, stopping for brief conversations with key stakeholders I'd identified in my pre-event briefing. By the time we reached the chairman, Eleanor had vanished. James, Sophia, Preston Caldwell greeted us warmly. "I was just telling Eleanor how impressed the board is with Blackwell's new medical innovation initiative. The focus on rural healthcare accessibility is particularly welcome. My wife is passionate about addressing systemic inequities in medical technology distribution," James replied, the pride in his voice unmistakable. "She convinced our board that market expansion and social impact aren't mutually exclusive." Preston turned to me with newfound respect. "Eleanor mentioned you have some concerns about the foundation's current governance structure." I shot James a quick glance. Eleanor had clearly been attempting to poison the well. "Not concerns," I clarified smoothly. "Just observations about potential modernization opportunities. The Foundation's work is exemplary, but its decision-making processes haven't evolved in decades." "Precisely what I've been arguing for years. Preston agreed unexpectedly. The old guard, forgive me, but Eleanor included, has resisted any meaningful structural change. Perhaps you'd be willing to share your thoughts with our governance committee? I'd be honored, I replied, suppressing my surprise at this easy victory. As dinner was announced, we discovered another calculated move by Eleanor. Our assigned table was populated entirely by Boston's newest money, tech entrepreneurs and biotech founders with no historical ties to the city's established social hierarchy. The intended slight was transparent. She's trying to segregate us with the other. Outsiders, James observed as we approached the table. Little does she know, I murmured, recognizing several faces, that I've been cultivating relationships with Boston's tech community since we announced the Blackwell Innovation Hub. The young CEO of a breakthrough gene therapy company stood as we approached. Ms. Chen, your team has been instrumental in helping us navigate our Series C round. We can't thank you enough for the introductions to those Singapore investors. As we took our seats, I noted Eleanor watching from across the ballroom, her plan to isolate us backfiring spectacularly as animated conversation erupted at our table. The contrast between the energetic exchange at our position and the stiff formality at the traditional power tables did not go unnoticed by the event photographers. Midway through dinner, my phone discreetly vibrated with a news alert. I checked it under the table, then showed the screen to James. His eyes widened slightly at the Boston Business Journal headline. Federal investigation into financial irregularities at Blackwell Industries predates new ownership. That wasn't us, I whispered. The timing suggested someone else had leaked information about the ongoing forensic audit, information that specifically emphasized the problems had existed before my acquisition. James scanned the room until his gaze settled on his father, who gave an almost imperceptible nod before returning to his conversation with the mayor. Dad, James breathed, surprised. He's chosen a side. Not sides, I corrected gently. He's chosen truth over family mythology. That distinction matters. The buzz of notification alerts rippled across the ballroom as more attendees received the breaking news. Conversations paused as phones were checked, followed by speculative glances toward our table, toward William, and most pointedly, toward Eleanor, whose rigid posture betrayed her awareness that something significant had shifted. By the time dessert was served, the gala's social dynamics had been completely rewired. Power brokers who had been maintaining strategic distance now found reasons to stop by our table. Foundation board members clustered nearby, suddenly eager to discuss Blackwell's innovation initiatives. Even Victoria had migrated to our orbit, positioning herself as an early supporter of the refreshing new direction at the company. Your mother is leaving, I noted to James as Eleanor made her way toward the exit, her small circle of loyalists trailing behind her. The exodus was premature and conspicuous, a public concession of defeat that would be noted in every social column tomorrow. William watched her go, his expression unreadable, before making his way to our table. The room's attention followed, his movement, the symbolic weight of his choice evident to everyone present. May I join you? He asked formally. James stood and pulled out a chair. Of course, Dad. William settled beside me, surveying the table of tech entrepreneurs with interest, rather than the dismissal he might have shown months earlier. I understand congratulations are in order, he said to the gene therapy CEO. Your clinical trial results are remarkable. As William engaged the young executives with unexpected openness, James leaned close to my ear. Did you orchestrate this entire evening? Not all of it, I admitted. Your father's decision to leak that information was his own. But I did analyze the social dynamics and identify strategic pressure points. James shook his head in amused disbelief. Remind me never to play chess with you. The gala's formal program began, and I listened with half my attention as various hospital administrators thanked donors and outlined initiatives. The other half of my mind was already processing the evening's developments, recalculating probabilities, and adjusting strategic timelines. Eleanor's premature departure had accelerated our timetable. Her social capital was depleting faster than anticipated, creating both opportunities and risks. William's public alignment with us changed the narrative from outsider takeover to family evolution. The business community's rapid pivot toward our vision suggested the professional rehabilitation of the Blackwell name was proceeding successfully. And now, the foundation chairman announced, I'd like to invite Sophia Chen Blackwell to the stage to share some exciting news about Blackwell Industries' commitment to medical innovation. The invitation was unplanned, another recalibration, in response to the shifting dynamics of the evening. As I made my way to the podium, I felt hundreds of calculating gazes following my progress. These weren't just socialites and philanthropists. They were Boston's power structure, assessing whether the newcomer who had outmaneuvered one of their own deserved acceptance. Thank you, Chairman Caldwell, I began, my voice steady as I surveyed the room. While I hadn't planned to speak formally, tonight, I'm grateful for the opportunity to share Blackwell Industries' vision for the future of medical technology. For the next 5 minutes, I outlined our innovation initiative, emphasizing the balance between cutting-edge advancement and equitable access. I acknowledged the company's storied history while painting a compelling picture of its future. I was careful to credit William's foundational leadership and James's ethical framework for the new direction. In closing, I said, I'd like to announce an additional commitment. Blackwell Industries will be establishing a fellowship program for young women in medical engineering with full tuition and guaranteed internships for 10 promising students annually. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic. As I returned to our table, I noted with satisfaction that several influential women on the hospital board were already discussing the fellowship with visible excitement. That was inspired, William said quietly as I took my seat. Eleanor always focused our philanthropy on buildings and galas, visible monuments. You're investing in people and ideas instead. People and ideas build the future, I replied. Buildings just house it. He studied me with new understanding. You know, when James first introduced you, I dismissed you as another ambitious young woman attracted to the Blackwell name. I couldn't have been more wrong. Many people underestimate me, Mr. Blackwell, I said, neither accusing nor defensive. It's been happening my entire life. William, please, he corrected, and I won't make that mistake again. He hesitated before continuing. I should tell you, Richard has agreed to resign from all remaining positions and forfeit his golden parachute in exchange for our handling the financial irregularities internally. This was significant news, a clean break that would allow the company to move forward without protracted legal battles. That's a positive development, I acknowledged. Was it your doing? William nodded. I made it clear that his alternatives were considerably worse. The evidence your forensic team uncovered left him little choice. And Eleanor? James asked. Will she continue fighting this transition? A shadow crossed William's face. Eleanor has built her identity around being the matriarch of the Blackwell Empire. Accepting you, he nodded to me, means acknowledging that empire isn't what she believed it was. That's a profound loss of self. I understand that, I said, surprising both men. Contrary to what she believes, I have no desire to humiliate or replace her. There's a meaningful role for her at Blackwell if she's willing to adapt. William looked skeptical. What did you have in mind? The Blackwell Foundation needs a director, I explained. Someone with deep community connections, social gravitas, and institutional knowledge. The philanthropic arm should be separate from corporate operations, but aligned with our values. James caught on immediately. It's perfect. Mother excels at relationship management and social influence. She'd maintain her public role as a Blackwell standard-bearer while channeling her energy constructively. She'd never accept, William said, though I detected a note of uncertainty in his voice. Not from me, certainly, I agreed. But from you and James together, positioned as a recognition of her unique capabilities rather than a consolation prize? Perhaps. William considered this, turning his water glass slowly. It would give her purpose and status while separating her from business operations. Clever. Strategic, I corrected gently. Finding the solution that serves everyone's authentic interests isn't clever. It's good business. The evening progressed, and I observed with satisfaction as new alliances formed across the ballroom. Boston's social architecture was reconfiguring itself around the new reality, one where the Blackwell name remained significant, but with a decidedly different power center. As the event concluded, James and I said our goodbyes, accepting dozens of lunch invitations and committee appointment suggestions that would have been unthinkable 6 weeks earlier. Mission accomplished? James asked as our car pulled away from the hospital. Phase 1, I qualified. Social acceptance is merely a platform for actual impact. The real work is just beginning. He took my hand, his expression thoughtful. You know, when I first met you at that charity gala, I was drawn to your mind. How differently you thought about philanthropy and impact. I had no idea I was talking to someone who would reinvent my family's entire legacy. Would you have asked for my number if you'd known? I teased. Even faster, he replied without hesitation, though I might have been more intimidated. As we drove through Boston's historic streets, past buildings that bore the names of families who had once looked down on mine, I reflected on the evening's victories. Not the social triumph, satisfying though it was, but the more meaningful wins. William's evolution from antagonist to ally. The Foundation's embrace of our innovation vision. The fellowship program that would create opportunity for young women facing the same barriers I had overcome. Eleanor's stricken expression as she left the gala flashed through my mind. Despite everything, I felt a surprising empathy for her position. Her world had been upended, her identity challenged at its core. The path I'd outlined for her through the Foundation offered dignity and purpose, if she could overcome her pride to accept it. What are you thinking about? James asked, noting my contemplative silence. Transformation, I replied. Not just of Blackwell Industries, but of the people involved. Your father has shown remarkable adaptability. The board members are evolving their perspectives. Even Victoria has recalibrated her position. And my mother? I considered the question carefully. Eleanor faces the most difficult transformation because she has the most rigid self-concept. But people can surprise you when given the right opportunity. James nodded slowly. I'll talk to her tomorrow about the Foundation position, not as a concession, but as a recognition of her strengths. As our car turned onto the tree-lined street leading to our brownstone, I allowed myself a moment of genuine satisfaction. The gold digger narrative had not merely been disproven, it had been thoroughly dismantled and replaced with something far more powerful, a story of competence, vision, and ethical leadership. The journey wasn't complete. Corporate transformations take time. Social reconfigurations face resistance. Family healing follows its own unpredictable timeline. But tonight had confirmed what I'd always believed. That authenticity, strategic thinking, and principled action could overcome even the most entrenched prejudices. You've changed everything, James said softly as we arrived home. We're just getting started, I replied, my mind already mapping the next phase of our shared vision. For Blackwell, for Boston, and for the legacy we would build together, far greater than what either of us could have created alone. Ms. Chen, the Jameson acquisition numbers are ready for your review. My assistant's voice came through the intercom, interrupting my thoughts as I gazed out over Boston's skyline from the newly renovated executive floor of Blackwell Tower. Thank you, Caroline. I'll look at them after my next meeting, I replied, checking my watch. 3 months had passed since the hospital gala, a whirlwind period of transformation for both Blackwell Industries and its founding family. The company's stock had risen 22% since the transition announcement. Our sustainable technology division had secured 2 major government contracts, and the business press had shifted from scandal coverage to innovation spotlights. But today's meeting had nothing to do with balance sheets or strategic acquisitions. In 10 minutes, I would be sitting down with Eleanor Blackwell for our first one-on-one conversation since the takeover. After weeks of negotiation through intermediaries, primarily William and James, she had finally agreed to discuss the Blackwell Foundation directorship. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Mom, just arrived. She's wearing her power suit and pearl choker. Battle armor deployed." I smiled at his perfect assessment. Eleanor's wardrobe choices were never accidental, particularly the pearl choker that had reportedly belonged to her grandmother, matriarch, of one of Boston's oldest shipping fortunes. She was coming prepared for confrontation, not capitulation. I touched up my lipstick, Blackwell blue, a subtle branding choice that had become my signature, and straightened my own armor, a precision-tailored suit from the same Fifth Avenue atelier that dressed female Fortune 50 CEOs. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. 2 women from different generations, each dressed to project authority and legacy, about to determine the future shape of their shared family enterprise. A soft knock preceded Caroline's announcement. "Mrs. Eleanor Blackwell is here to see you." "Please." "Send her in," I replied, remaining seated behind my desk, formerly William's desk, and his father's before him. The power dynamics were intentional. Eleanor needed to acknowledge the reality of the new organizational hierarchy before we could establish a productive working relationship. She entered with the practiced poise of a woman who had spent decades in Boston's social spotlight, her spine straight, her chin lifted, her expression carefully neutral. I noted with interest that she'd had her hair styled differently, a more modern cut that softened her features and subtracted years from her appearance. "Eleanor, thank you for coming," I greeted her, rising and extending my hand across the desk. "Would you prefer coffee or tea?" She hesitated fractionally before accepting the handshake. "Tea, thank you. Earl Grey if you have it." I signaled to Caroline, who slipped out to prepare the refreshments. The brief exchange had already established important parameters. Eleanor had accepted the basic courtesy of professional engagement, even while maintaining her formal distance. "This office has changed," she observed, glancing around at the renovated space. Where William had maintained dark wood paneling and heavy leather furniture, I had opted for clean lines, increased natural, light and subtle technological integration. It's hardly recognizable. "Change was necessary," I replied simply. The previous design prioritized tradition over functionality. We've preserved key historical elements while creating a workspace that reflects modern business practices. Eleanor's lips thinned slightly. "A metaphor for your overall approach to Blackwell, I suppose." "An accurate observation," I acknowledged, gesturing for her to take a seat in one of the ergonomic chairs positioned across from my desk, though I prefer to think of it as evolution rather than replacement. She sat with the perfect posture that likely had been drilled into her at some exclusive finishing school decades earlier. "William tells me you have a proposition regarding the foundation. Direct and unsentimental, qualities I could appreciate despite our differences." "I do. As you know, we're restructuring Blackwell's philanthropic activities under a unified foundation with significantly increased funding. The position requires someone with deep community knowledge, established relationships across Boston's institutional landscape, and a genuine commitment to the Blackwell legacy." Caroline returned with a tea service, fine bone china that had been in the Blackwell boardroom for generations, another deliberate choice on my part. Eleanor noticed immediately, her eyes lingering on the familiar pattern as Caroline poured. "And you believe I'm qualified for this role?" Eleanor asked once we were alone again, skepticism evident in her tone. "You're uniquely qualified," I corrected. No one else combines your historical knowledge, social network, and understanding of the Blackwell name's significance in this community. The question isn't your qualifications, Eleanor. It's whether you're willing to channel your considerable talents into a new expression of the Blackwell legacy. She sipped her tea, studying me over the rim of the cup. You're offering me a consolation prize. I'm offering you a powerful platform, I countered firmly. The foundation will be endowed with $200 million initially. Its director will have significant autonomy over grant-making, community partnerships, and institutional relationships within the framework of our established mission and values. Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly at the figure. $200 million is substantial. Blackwell's philanthropic impact should match its commercial success, I replied. The foundation's endowment will grow as the company prospers. She set her cup down carefully. And what exactly would my role entail day to day? I opened a folder on my desk, extracting a prospectus I'd prepared for this conversation. The foundation will focus on 3 areas: educational innovation, medical, technology access, and sustainable urban development. As director, you would build and lead a professional team, establish grant-making criteria, cultivate institutional partnerships, and serve as the public face of Blackwell's community engagement. Eleanor accepted the document, scanning its contents with the shrewd assessment of someone accustomed to identifying hidden agendas. This is more substantial than I expected. It's not charity, Eleanor, I said directly. It's strategy. You possess capabilities that would take another candidate years to develop. I'm proposing to leverage those capabilities for mutual benefit. Mutual benefit, she repeated, a hint of bitterness coloring her tone. You've taken my family's company, restructured my husband's role, redirected my son's career, and now you're offering to leverage my social position. I met her gaze steadily. Your family's company was being systematically mismanaged and looted by your eldest son. Your husband has found renewed purpose as chairman emeritus, focusing on the strategic relationships he genuinely enjoys rather than day-to-day operations he had grown to resent. And James has finally stepped into a role that honors both his environmental expertise and his family heritage. Eleanor flinched slightly at the reference to Richard's misdeeds, but didn't dispute the characterization. You've certainly revised our family narrative efficiently. I haven't revised anything, I corrected. I've simply removed the fiction that was obscuring the truth. The Blackwell legacy deserves better than comfortable myths, Eleanor. It deserves authentic purpose and competent stewardship. A long silence followed as Eleanor returned to the prospectus, turning pages with deliberate care. I waited, giving her the space to process both the professional opportunity and its implicit personal challenge. The fellowship program for women in engineering, she finally said. That was your initiative? Originally, yes, I confirmed. Though, James has been instrumental in shaping its implementation. It's impressive, she admitted reluctantly, particularly the mentorship structure. This was unexpected, genuine engagement with the programmatic details rather than the power dynamics. The mentorship component is crucial, I agreed. Access to capital and education isn't sufficient without pathways to leadership, something I learned through personal experience. Eleanor looked up, studying me with new curiosity. You had mentors? I had to find them for myself, I replied, allowing a personal note to enter the conversation for the first time. Women who had navigated male-dominated industries, broken barriers, built significant enterprises against substantial headwinds. I studied their methods, sought their guidance when possible, learned from their mistakes and successes. Women, like me, you mean, Eleanor said, surprising me with her perceptiveness. In some ways, I acknowledged. Though our contexts differ, we've both operated in environments that weren't designed for us. You built your influence within the constraints of traditional Boston society. I built mine by identifying structural gaps in the financial system. Eleanor set the prospectus down, her expression thoughtful. When William and I married, my father-in-law made it abundantly clear that my role was to manage the social dimension of the Blackwell enterprise. Charitable engagements, cultural patronage, the right club memberships and school connections for our children. The business itself was not my concern. And you excelled within those parameters, I noted. The Blackwell name opened doors across Boston's institutions that would have remained closed to a manufacturing family without your social orchestration. She nodded, a hint of pride surfacing. Those relationships mattered, still matter. When the company faced a liquidity crisis in the early 90s, it was my connection to First Boston's chairman. Our children attended the same sailing camp that secured the bridge financing when conventional channels had failed. This was new information, a glimpse into Eleanor's unacknowledged business contributions that complicated my understanding of the family dynamics. Those kinds of relationships remain valuable, I said carefully, particularly for the Foundation's work, where institutional partnerships will be essential. Eleanor straightened, something shifting in her demeanor. I've made inquiries about you, Sophia. Discreet ones, through channels you might not anticipate. I maintained a neutral expression, though internally I reassessed the woman across from me. She had resources and methods I hadn't fully appreciated. And what did you learn? That you're ruthlessly effective but surprisingly ethical. That you've left several deals on the table when the human cost would have been too high. That your former colleagues at Goldman respect your capabilities while resenting your departure. A faint smile touched her lips. And that your parents still run that dry cleaning business in Queens, despite your offers to set them up in retirement. The mention of my parents, so unexpected in this context, caught me off guard. They built something meaningful, I said simply. They don't measure success the way Wall Street does. Neither do I, Eleanor replied. Despite appearances to the contrary. She stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked Boston Harbor. When I first joined the Blackwell family, that shipyard belonged to my father, she said, pointing to a section of the harbor that now housed luxury condominiums. William's father acquired it when shipping containerization made my family's traditional business model obsolete. The Blackwells adapted, the Cabots didn't. She turned back to face me. I learned then that legacy without innovation is just history. A lesson my eldest son never grasped, despite my attempts to instill it. This revelation recontextualized everything I thought I understood about Eleanor's perspective. She wasn't simply a social traditionalist resisting change. She had witnessed firsthand the consequences of failing to evolve. The Foundation directorship, she continued, returning to her seat with renewed purpose. I'll accept it on 3 conditions. I nodded, curious to hear her terms. Go on. First, I want genuine autonomy within the mission parameters. No micromanagement, no second-guessing my relationship-building methods. Agreed, I replied. With quarterly strategic alignment reviews between you, myself, and James. She considered this amendment before nodding. Acceptable. Second, I want Richard included in the redemption narrative, not exonerated. His actions were inexcusable, but given a path to make amends. Perhaps through some supervised role in the Foundation once he's completed his treatment. This request surprised me. After all that had transpired, Eleanor was still advocating for her eldest son's rehabilitation. Contingent on full financial restitution, completion of a recognized ethics training program, and a 2-year probationary period with limited authority, I countered. Agreed, she said after brief consideration. He needs structure and accountability, not punishment or enabling. Her insight into her son's needs revealed a clearer-eyed perspective than I had given her credit for. And your third condition? Eleanor straightened, meeting my gaze directly. I want you to join me for tea at the Somerset Club next Thursday, as my guest? Of all the possible demands, this was perhaps the most unexpected. The Somerset Club was Boston's most exclusive old money institution, famously resistant to new wealth and outsiders. May I ask why? Because narratives matter, she replied simply. If I'm to direct the Blackwell Foundation effectively, the social infrastructure needs to understand that you and I have reached an accommodation. Being seen with me at Somerset sends that message unambiguously. I studied her with newfound respect. Eleanor wasn't simply negotiating professional parameters. She was orchestrating the social signaling that would enable both of us to succeed in our respective domains. Thursday at 3, I confirmed, though I suspect some members may find their tea suddenly bitter. The ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. I'm counting on it. Change is often uncomfortable for those who've benefited most from the status quo. With our negotiation concluded, Eleanor rose to leave, gathering her handbag with the practiced efficiency of a woman accustomed to commanding rooms far more intimidating than my office. At the door, she paused. One last thing, Sophia, that painting. She gestured to the large canvas I'd installed on the office's east wall. A contemporary piece by an emerging Vietnamese-American artist that depicted Boston's skyline as a palimpsest of historical and modern elements. Is it significant to you? She asked. It represents my vision for Blackwell, I explained. Honoring historical foundations while building something distinctly contemporary. The artist comes from a refugee background, but received her training at Rhode Island School of Design. Tradition and innovation in conversation. Eleanor studied the painting with genuine interest. It's striking. Perhaps too modern for the foundation offices, but thought-provoking. She turned back to me. James has always had excellent taste. I see his influence in your aesthetic choices. Before I could respond to this oblique acknowledgement of our marriage's substance, she continued, The foundation will require appropriate art. Perhaps we could review options together. I know several promising local artists who might capture our mission effectively. I'd welcome your input, I replied, recognizing the olive branch being extended. With a crisp nod, Eleanor departed, leaving behind the scent of French perfume and the distinct impression that I had underestimated her capacity for strategic adaptation. As the door closed, I reached for my phone to text James. Meeting successful. Your mother is far more formidable than even you suggested. His reply came quickly. Told you. Stubbornness and strategic thinking run on both sides of my family. How did it go? She accepted with reasonable conditions. We're having tea at Somerset next week. A moment passed before his response appeared. Somerset? That's unprecedented. Dad will be shocked. She's signaling acceptance to her social circle. Smart move, actually. Mom doesn't make social moves without multiple layers of strategy. Be prepared. I smiled at his warning, appreciating his insight. Into family dynamics I was still learning to navigate. Always am. Dinner tonight? Absolutely. I've got news about the sustainable manufacturing pilot. Dad's on board with the full investment. Setting my phone aside, I turned to the window, gazing out at the city that had witnessed the rise and evolution of the Blackwell legacy across generations. In just 6 months, we had transformed a floundering family enterprise into a forward-looking corporation, restructured governance to prioritize competence over bloodline, and now established a framework for Eleanor's continued influence through the foundation. None of it had followed the path I'd initially envisioned when I began acquiring Blackwell shares 5 years ago. The personal entanglements, family dynamics, and emotional complexities had demanded a flexibility I hadn't anticipated, needing. Yet the outcome was arguably stronger than my original strategic vision. A revitalized company, yes, but also a family adapting to new realities without losing its essential character. The intercom buzzed, interrupting my reflection. Ms. Chen, your 3 o'clock is here. The team from MIT's Advanced Manufacturing Lab. Send them in, I replied, gathering the presentation materials for our discussion of next-generation production technologies. As the door opened, I smoothly transitioned from contemplating family dynamics to evaluating technical specifications, another day in the evolving life of Blackwell Industries. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza, surveying the crowd gathered for the official launch of the Blackwell Foundation. Boston's elite had turned out in full force: university presidents, hospital directors, cultural institution leaders, and corporate executives, all curious to witness the next chapter in the city's most talked-about business transformation. Eleanor stood to my right, resplendent in a gown whose deep blue subtly echoed the company's signature color, a detail not lost on me or the business press covering the event. William and James flanked her, creating a visual tableau of family unity that had been meticulously choreographed for maximum impact. Distinguished guests, on behalf of Blackwell Industries and the newly established Blackwell Foundation, welcome, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the state-of-the-art sound system. Tonight marks not just the launch of a philanthropic initiative, but the reaffirmation of a century-long commitment to this community. As I outlined the Foundation's mission and initial grant programs, I observed the audience's engaged response. In the 6 months since Eleanor had accepted the directorship, she had worked with surprising dedication to develop innovative approaches to the Foundation's core focus areas. Our weekly strategy sessions had evolved from careful negotiations to genuinely productive collaborations, with occasional flashes of mutual respect breaking through our professional rapport. The Foundation's leadership reflects our commitment to blending established wisdom with fresh perspective, I continued. I'm pleased to introduce the Foundation's inaugural director, someone whose dedication to Boston's institutions and deep understanding of community needs makes her uniquely qualified for this role. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor Blackwell. Applause was enthusiastic as Eleanor took the podium. Her remarks were characteristically polished, but contained an authenticity that I hadn't witnessed in our early encounters. She spoke passionately about educational opportunity, medical innovation, and sustainable urban development, causes she had genuinely embraced as her own over the past months. When she announced the Foundation's first major initiative, a $30 million grant program for women entrepreneurs in medical technology, I felt a surprising surge of pride in our shared accomplishment. The program balanced Eleanor's preference for institutional partnerships with my emphasis on addressing systemic barriers to innovation. Following the formal presentations, the evening transitioned to the networking reception that Eleanor had orchestrated with her characteristic attention to social engineering. I circulated through the crowd, engaging with key stakeholders while observing the room's dynamics with analytical interest. Quite a transformation, a familiar voice remarked, as Victoria Cabot Harrison appeared at my elbow, champagne flute in hand. 6 months ago, Eleanor was rallying the old guard against you. Now she's practically adopted your vision as her own. The vision is authentically shared, I corrected mildly. Eleanor brings perspective and relationships that complement my strategic direction. The Foundation is stronger for having both influences. Victoria raised an eyebrow skeptically. Come now, Sophia. We both know a victory when we see one. You've managed what no one thought possible. You've brought Eleanor Blackwell into your orbit. That perspective misses the point entirely, I replied. This isn't about winning or losing. It's about evolving a legacy to meet new challenges, without losing its essential character. Before Victoria could respond, I excused myself, making my way toward a quiet corner where James stood in conversation with his father. As I approached, I caught a fragment of their exchange. Never seen your mother this energized, William was saying. The Foundation has given her purpose that the social circuit never did. James nodded in agreement. She's actually reading research papers on educational outcomes. Asked me to explain statistical significance last week. Discussing methodology. Without me? I asked lightly as I joined them. William greeted me with a warm nod that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Sophia. The event is a tremendous success. The president of Northeastern just committed to matching our STEM scholarship program. Eleanor's doing, I acknowledged. Her approach to institutional partnerships is remarkably effective. James slipped, his arm around my waist. The two of you make a frighteningly competent team. The business community doesn't know whether to be impressed or terrified. Both is the appropriate response, I replied with a smile. William excused himself to speak, with the mayor, leaving James and me momentarily alone amid the crowded ballroom. Did you ever imagine this outcome when you started acquiring Blackwell shares? James asked quietly. Eleanor running your foundation? Dad advising the innovation division? Richard actually completing his rehabilitation program? I considered the question thoughtfully. I imagined transforming the company. I didn't anticipate transforming the family or being transformed myself in the process. James studied me with the perceptive gaze that had first drawn me to him at that charity gala years ago. How have you been transformed? I've always understood power as a tool for creating change, I replied, watching Eleanor across the room as she engaged animatedly with a university chancellor. But I've come to appreciate that lasting change requires bringing people along, not simply imposing a new direction. Your mother taught me that, ironically enough. And she's learned from you that adaptation isn't surrender, James observed. That evolving doesn't mean erasing what came before. Across the room, Eleanor caught my eye and gave a slight nod, our established signal that a key stakeholder needed joint attention. Without words, we had developed a choreography for these events, maximizing our complementary strengths. Duty calls, I said to James. The Chancellor of Boston University appears to need convincing about the Innovation Campus partnership. James pressed a kiss to my temple. Go work your magic. I'll find you for the donor acknowledgement in 20 minutes. As I crossed the ballroom to join Eleanor, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The gold digger accusation that had once stung now seemed almost comically misplaced, a relic from a narrative that had been thoroughly rewritten. What had begun as a straightforward business acquisition had evolved into something far more complex and rewarding. The revitalization of a century-old company, the recalibration of a prominent family's dynamics, and the creation of a philanthropic enterprise with genuine potential for impact. Chancellor Matthews was just expressing interest in our technology incubator concept, Eleanor said smoothly as I joined her conversation. I thought you might share the implementation timeline we've been developing. As we engaged in the familiar rhythm of complementary expertise, Eleanor's institutional knowledge providing context for my strategic vision, I recognized that we had achieved something neither of us could have accomplished alone. The gold digger and the society matriarch had transcended their limiting labels, creating a partnership that honored tradition while embracing innovation. The Blackwell legacy hadn't ended with my acquisition of the company. It had evolved into something more resilient and purposeful than either family tradition or corporate strategy alone could have produced. In the end, the most valuable asset wasn't the company I'd acquired or the family name I'd married into. It was the integrated vision we'd created together, a legacy stronger than the sum of its parts. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.